My name is Jessie Jim. I am the department manager for Navajo Department of Agriculture and Donet and Schlinigi last chain and Schlinson on Bisley Bushes chain, Chichidashi Chedo, Todichini Nashinale. I am from Le Te Ahede Nashado Keashte Akutan San Schle. So that's who I am and who I'm working with. And I reached out to NSA here to number one, talk about AIF, and we had a great presentation then, as well as introduce our insurance agent, Native Lands, and we had done that, and we missed this presentation, but we're back, and I'm here to provide some updates as far as the range and carrying capacity for the Navajo Nation. And it's a real eye opener as far as, what do we have, as well as what are we supposed to be? What are the numbers that we're supposed to be at? So when we look at the numbers for the nation, you can see on this graph here, this was provided by the Navajo Fish and Wildlife Department. They had done a survey back in 2018. And then based off of their survey, this is what they had come up with on what they counted as far as sheep numbers. That's with cattle, sheep, and horses are not included on this. I want to point that out, as well as goats. Goats are included. Horses are just not. So you can see that the nation, the carrying capacity should be at 185,000 sheep units. And if we convert that to, AUMs, that would mean, it would mean 46,000 head of cattle could be on the nation. What we do have, real numbers is 563,000 sheep units. So we are way over our numbers. We're almost 3 times over our numbers that should be allowed to graze on the nation. And that's alarming for a lot of reasons. Number one is the range condition and the longevity of this lifestyle. How do we continue this lifestyle? Well, before we start moving forward, we need to address these numbers. And if we look at each agency, in Chin Lee agency, there should only be 2,369 sheep units. But what we do got there is 54,000. And then Fort Defiance, you could see the numbers there. And Eastern, I think Eastern is a well-managed agency for a number of reasons. Number one is permittees, the allottees, they have to pay for their livestock to graze. And so that's one control mechanism. But the number one control mechanism is fencing. Fencing is a lot easier to do in Eastern, and especially with the allotments. So you have two control mechanisms that help you keep the numbers managed properly. And in the other areas, in the other agencies, if you look at Chin Lee, they are, and Fort Defiance, they are highly populated areas. So that means everybody, has livestock because it's part of who we are as Navajos. We are told, to have sheep, cattle, and horses as a way to live. So, it's the clash of our cultural values and our teachings, and then with Western society, there's that clash. But I think that was the only livelihood. I don't think so. It was the only livelihood to sustain our people, was raising livestock and living off the land. But now there's different types of professions to where people are moving away, job opportunities. And so that leaves our grandparents, our parents left behind with no assistance. And, it got away from us, but also we do have producers that willingly graze unauthorized livestock. And so how do we address that? Number one is we need to look at what it is that we're trying to address, and that's our sheep unit for the range conditions. And with the combining the Western teachings as well as the traditional teachings, we need to make better decisions on what we graze and for how long and where at. So, that's what I like about NSA being part of the program. And then, what they're doing is teaching our people how to do this themselves rather than having, the government come in and say, hey, you can't do this. Well, why not? If our people had a little bit of handle on it, as far as measuring their grasses to get an idea of their utilization, as well as what is out there, what type of grasses, forbs, what am I dealing with? And going back to the people for them to really understand wholeheartedly how to manage their numbers. Because once you have a little bit of knowledge and you have a goal in mind with what you're doing with your operation and how are you going to do it, number one is you need to manage the land first in order to have a successful livestock operation. And these are pictures of the BIA staff. To the right is Dr. Calvert Curley, who is the director of the natural resources for BIA on the right. And then you have the Fort Defiance manager there. He's now retired. Oh gosh, his name is slipping, but he's there with the grazing officials doing a demonstration. Okay, so for Fort Defiance Agency, this is what BIA, this is actually Dr. Curley's presentation. And so on this, you can see the districts that are within Fort Defiance, and then also the total acres within each chapter, and then the unadjusted carrying capacity of the sheep units there. And then and the third column is the adjusted, working with according to the slopes and the water availability. And then also what's the horses permitted, and then also the permitted numbers. And then it goes down to sheep. So if we look at that, I want to point out there was I was at a meeting in Tuba City with the Western BIA office, and they were talking about the unadjusted. So during the livestock reduction, John Collier was the BIA regional director, and he permitted grazing permits based off of unadjusted. So we were running, we were maxing out what was available here. And we fast forward, I believe, I can't remember the year, I'm thinking, but there was the Navajo Nation filed a lawsuit against the US government for mismanagement of trust assets. And out of that lawsuit, we had a settlement of 57 million that was given to the nation. And part of the settlement also was the conservation plans. And that's where NSA is assisting some, producers who need in northern and eastern. So that's part of the settlement. And now, okay, BIA is really focusing in on the real numbers, what is out there and what can we have. And this is part of their recommendation. that they're telling us this is what's there, what's available, and here's our recommended. And that's what we recommend to the grazing officials, to notify the people and for their approval and their recommendation based off of this scientific data and also what they're seeing. So those are the numbers for Fort Defiance. It's, I've never seen this information. And with that in mind, if you're if you have some sort of range management background, and these numbers mean a lot to you. And that's why we're notifying the people of what's going to come down. Here you can see a breakdown of the grazing permits numbers in each district, how many was there, how many are active, and then the inactive. And then also there's duplications of what we're running across. So that's just a breakdown of the grazing permits as well as the ALUPs in Fort Defiance. Okay, so when you look at the utilization study, they did have a variety of monitoring points that they determine the carrying capacity, the recommended carrying capacity, and that's going to come at the end of this presentation. So they space themselves out throughout District 14. You can see one monitoring point is there in Mexican Springs, Twin Lakes, Tohatchee, Coyote Canyon. And so this looks like more on the eastern side of District 16, District 14 on the New Mexico side. And on the column at the end, that is the utilization, what level. And so a lot of the utilization range from moderate to severe. And this is where those monitoring points were located. So it was in different areas. You can see that the top left picture is most likely located at a bottom of a plateau and a little pond there, and then further up to the mountain. And this is what the grazing conditions look like. The top right, you do have the ideal grazing area, which is grasses, forbs, and trees there. And that's what you want to see is the grasses. There's a balance. And then when you go down to the bottom left, you can see that the utilization is most likely going to be severe to severe and almost at 100% utilized. And so this is the issue here is majority of our Navajo rangelands look like that. Some producers push back and say, we're not overgrazing, which is true. Some of them do manage their numbers how they're supposed to. There's some that come in without a permit, and then also our feral horses. Our feral horses are the ones that are causing this. Nobody can get a hold of them. And so the permittee, has a grazing plan and they're not using this area, but when they come back, it's been grazed, and that's because of the feral horses. That's what we need to get control of, number two. Some more locations with the overgrazing, you can see there in the bottom right, that's what it's causing, a lot of erosions. And you need your grasses, you need some stubble height to hold the dirt down and to slow the water down. And if you're not going to allow for your pastures to rest, this is what it's going to turn to. And we need to find the balance, and that's what we're looking at from the department. Okay, based off of this report and based off of what's out there, a lot of the producers out there, well, everybody on the nation, we had sent out a memo requiring a mandatory tally count, because we need to know some real numbers so we can start planning with AIF dollars of how are we going to assist with alternative grazing area as well as supplemental feed? So keep that in mind as we're going. And then here are some other pictures, and it's pretty bad. I always say if I were to graze on the nation, I would graze along the roadways because that's where you have the most vegetation. But the further you go, this is the reality of our rangelands, and it's really hard to accept, but we're here now and we can make those changes. No matter where you go, up in the mountains, that's where the grasses are supposed to be, but they're having the same issues that the ranchers down in the plateau are having. There's too many livestock, and then also wildlife. And our livestock are pretty hardy, and they can survive on this. And well, I think we're in the right direction as far as our cattle. I know there was a big push for Angus, and that's great too, but the cattle we got here are very hardy, and good job to our producers in producing that type of cattle. I believe this is in Mexican Springs area. You can see the Triscas there in that top left. And then also on the labels there too. Okay, so when we moved to Chinle, the same thing. We do have quite a few RMUs and mini farms. And when you drive, I think from right there at mini farms to the Kienta, that road there, some of the RMUs are in that area, and you can notice a difference, which is great. So there are the total acres, the unadjusted numbers, and then the adjusted. So in District 10, we would have to take off about 3,500 animal sheep units to accommodate what's there. So it's not bad, but it is, we need to make some adjustments there. And what do we do? It would be interesting to know, because in this area, I know that they have a problem with feral bulls in the area on Black Mesa. So, how many of that number that is being reported is really feral? And it may be that we just need to go in there and remove the feral livestock and horses, and it could fix itself. But for now, this is what we need to do, is we need to reduce. And then the permits, active, inactive, pending transfer, and then also the quiet titles and so forth. That's what it's looking like in Chinle. In Western, that's a unique. It's going to be tough on Western. With Western and Land Management District 3 and 1, that's the meeting I was referring to earlier. During that meeting in that area, I believe that there is 2,000 permits. And based off of their assessments as well as monitoring, their recommendation is to reduce those 2,000 permits to less than 20. That's a hard conversation that we have to have with our producers that way. And I also want to remind everybody here that we do have tribal ranches. We do have tribal ranches that have been purchased by the nation through our previous leaders that we have access to. But we do have lessees that are on there and having that conversation of, okay, where do we rotate all of these cattle and where do we put them? Long term, that's where we could utilize those tribal ranches. You know, if we wanted to do something right now, we would have to look at Nappy because they have fields on there and they need numbers on there. And why not utilize our own farm? But we need our producers to start vaccinating their cattle as well as deworming and get them on a management schedule and getting them used to humans. Because if they're transferred over to Nappy and they're put on those circles, we need them to be hot wire trained and, not so hot and feral. And that's what we could do right now. We could also do the supplemental feeding program, but it cannot be free. It's like, we're enabling what we're trying to address right now. So, and then also the introductions of invasive species. You have your Russian thistle, tumbleweeds, your goat heads, and other weeds that we could introduce into the area. Then we got another problem on our hands. So we need to get everybody into compliance. If you don't have a permit, what are you grazing on? Whose permit are you using? Is it your parents? Is it your grandparents? How are you, whose permit, number one, and then start the probate process. And if you just don't have one, it's either pin them up and feed them out, find an alternative grazing area, or number one, you reduce your livestock on your own. And if you don't do any of those avenues, then that's when resource enforcement gets involved. And the alternative to that is seizure. And we're trying to find a meeting point with our producers on how do we go about this. We cannot keep going in the direction that we're going. If we do, we're going to have nothing. Going back to Western Agency, you look at the permits there, like I was saying, 2,600. And NSA, if you could look at the conservation plans completed and you look at the active, I say you guys, it'd be great if you guys could start to expand that way. And if you guys need assistance, we definitely could help you. Shiprock Agency, there's the information there. And if you look at District 12, it's a lot of area. The carrying capacity is low, but if you, close your eyes for a second and picture that drive to Shiprock, you can imagine why. People see the acres and think there should be more land, we should have increased sheep units allowed to graze, but you also have to think about that. This was provided last year, about May. I remember, I think it was 3 days into my position, I got sent over here and I got the presentation. And you can see the difference on the conservation plans that were completed. And, I think you guys with NSA had a hand in that. And I just want to say thank you and continue helping our producers out there. So the next one here is Eastern. Eastern is, they have different type of land statuses that we also need to look into. And then I think that's also, their numbers are managed well because of that. BIA has more authority. And for some reason, I don't know why, we like to, as Navajos, abide by the federal laws, abide by the state laws and city laws. And then when we come back to the nation, we choose, we don't want to listen to it. And that's something we got to fix on our part, to follow the regulations. I mean, I've reviewed it, and it's, you know, we need to make some amendments. I'll just put it that way. So those are the numbers for Eastern. Um, it's not much to say about Eastern. MPL is another situation to where it's very difficult because, number one, the permits in that area were all canceled back in 1973. And it was due to a lawsuit from the Hopi tribe. To sum it up, is that they were saying Navajo families were starting to graze on their lands and move into their territory. And so they got the government involved, and that's where the Hopi partition lands and Navajo partition lands came into play. And so nobody is supposed to be on there. I think there was something like 1,100 permits that were all canceled, and they had to do a relocation, and that's where New Lands comes into play. New Lands is the relocatees that didn't want to stay on HPL, nor did they want to move and consolidate on MPL. So they took an accommodation to be moved to New Lands. That's one scenario. And then another scenario is some of the producers out there graze both on MPL and HPL. So they would have their summer camps on HPL and winter camps on MPL. So then the boundary was established, and they could stay there on HPL and receive a Hopi grazing permit as well as a census number. So that's where they could choose that, or they could relinquish that grazing area and stay on their MPL and have a home built there. That's another relocation package. And then the other one was they were moved to border towns like Flagstaff, Albuquerque, wherever they wanted to move. And so those were the relocation, the accommodations. And if they did take that, their permits were canceled. So it's an interesting thing. And that now we have started interviewing to reissue permits. There's the phase one, who were the original permittees that were given their permits back. And I believe there was like 50 of them that they established, and 12, I think, is what they gave back. Now we are in phase two, which is the airship. And so the children of the permittees that had their permits cancel, now they have to submit an application, and they have requirements that they have to meet. So that's the phase that we're in. We did start interviews with the applicants, and precinct 1, we will be starting precinct 2, and then moving on to precinct 3, and then giving the recommendations to RDC to approve. And then from there, it gets sent to BIA. And, hopefully within the next year, we'll have permits being reissued. And then phase 3 is a case-by-case scenario. So, that's a little history on MPL. And those are the chapters that are located within MPL. Okay, so here's a summary of what we just talked about. Is the acres, the unadjusted is 215,000, which this is kind of encouraging. If you guys remember, in the 2018 study was at 185,000. And then okay, so we're okay, but we're not good. What they're suggesting is that we allow 133,000 sheep units to graze. And then the horses, and then the total for the permittees, how many are going to be allowed to have grazing permit on the nation, which is 10,000. And there are the numbers of 455,000 that would be permitted. So with that in mind, and the current range conditions, we need to make some adjustments, some serious adjustments. One of the suggestions is maybe not allowing horses to be on the grazing permit, because we they're viewed as transportation, and just with the degradation of the rangelands, maybe we ought to just remove horses from the rangeland, since it's not an economical thing to do right now. So here are the adjustments, the recommended adjustments. So in Fort Defiance, you can see looking at the total grazing permits for the agency, and if we were to reissue all 3,620 of the permittees, that would amount to about 6 sheep units each. So with the Navajo Nation code, that would not be allowable. The minimum, that we should allow people to graze is 10 sheep units. So we would not be upholding the Navajo Nation Title III code. So if we look at the active grazing permits for Fort Defiance, and we reissue straight across the board, and that would be 17 sheep units. But each producer is different. Some, have the ability to manage large numbers, and some are content with, 4 or 5, just as long as they see their sheep every day. And that's important too. That's something that I look at, when looking at making these reviewing these recommendations, but also our people that are out there, and keeping that in mind. So if we look at Chin Lee, moving down, you can see the number of sheep units that would be reissued, and in Western and Shiprock Agency. Eastern, they, like I said, they have allotments on that side. There is some trust land, but they handle it well. I haven't got their numbers yet. I'm just new to the position. Next month will be, I'd be here a year. So going back to the overgrazing and the drought, what we are experiencing right now. If we look at the effects of overgrazing, is, we have increased erosions, we have sand dunes, and then when it rains, we have flooding, because we don't have the plants to slow it down, as well as our topsoil. It decreases the plant cover, the diversity of the plants. When it becomes overgrazed like this, we become more susceptible to invasive species growth, and that's not good, because it takes from the plants, the native plants that should be there. And then also the vegetation is not there for the cattle, and that's where we start to see an increase in poisoning, because of what they're consuming. They're going to consume what's there, and if it's a poisonous milkweed, then that's what they're going to eat, and that's not good for the producer, as far as just having their livestock, but also selling, and then also not great for the land. And if this is a great visual of how our plants should look. The more roots that we have in the ground, like I said, the better water can slow down, as well as promote more growth in the area. And the plant on the left with the longer roots, that hasn't been grazed. And then the NRCS conservation what they say is, take half, leave half. And this is just a visual of what the roots look like. And then if you're really pushing it to where you're grazing up to 70% of that that plant there, this is what it's looking like underneath. And when you're grazing 90% to 100% of it, this is what happens is we don't have enough roots to hold that plant there, and then we start to lose, and it becomes barren. Here are some pictures of overgrazing. Again, the percentage of, looking at it, a picture of what the plant looks like, and then looking at the scale on the left there. So we are in this area 90% grazed. And when you constantly leave it like that, the erosion, sand erosion comes in. And then worse is when the gullies start to form because of the fast flowing water. Here's sand erosion. You can see that there's very little plant grasses there. There's more forbs than anything. And then right here is between Nosh Chitty and Tehachapi. You can imagine, just because of the high population in this area, families grow, and so does the livestock numbers. And this is the effects of when you don't abide by the grazing regulations and graze if you only have a permit. This is, I think, across the road. So going back to the importance of roots, of what could it do? It can do a lot, but we need to manage it on top, manage our grazing. And then during, I think, 2020, that's when we had those severe dust storms. And that's because the plants weren't there to hold it down. And then here's the aerial view of a dust storm. You can see there in the bottom right what it looked like. And then to our neighbors up in the north, Colorado, our dirt made it all the way up to their mountains. And that's an eye opener. So producers need to, number one, put their conservation plans together. How are they going to manage their grazing area to prevent and, to number one, improve our current conditions, and then number two, prevent what we're going through right now. It needs to be in that conservation plan. And then from the Navajo Nation part of it, before we start reissuing permits, we need to we need to have a ARMP, an agricultural resource management plan. And that's, going to be telling BIA and the government how we are going to manage our resources. And right now the nation has, it's a NEPA process. It's required, it's federally required. We do have a contract. Fish and Wildlife is the department that's handling the ARMP, and we're assisting as well. So we have found a contractor to start putting this plan together and start monitoring areas to get a real idea of an updated anyway of the carrying capacity on our side from the nation. That's our obligation. That's what we're working on, and we should be meeting with the team, I think, here in a couple of months and start strategizing. We have strategized, but now we're getting all of the paperwork in order and to make it official. And within this process, they'll be collecting the vegetation and then determining the stocking rate as well as carrying capacity. And how are we going to start monitoring from here on out, as well as providing tally counts. That's key. If we can manage our numbers as livestock producers to manage our land better, that's all we need to do to continue this type. And there's going to be a lot of pushback, and it's just because of the lack of education. Once you understand, you have to do it. If you don't want to, then I really don't know what to say. um, this is a choice that we made as a livestock producers to have livestock and to choose this lifestyle. And with it comes responsibilities. And I have out there, I've talked to a few people, and I talked to some permittees out in Botaway Gap area after the Marina cattle theft, and they had an understanding. And the elders, they're talking, they understand, and they always go back to their teachings of, why they have livestock, the traditional side of it, as well as what it teaches you and what you're supposed to do to live life. So the elders understand. It's right in between, how do we get people to understand um, that this needs to happen? It's going to happen either way, but we want people to be involved in making those decisions, as well as abiding by what we need to do in our laws. So that concludes my presentation. And I would like to get out to the permittee meetings and start, providing these presentations. Right now, I'm a little slow down a little bit doing some in-house stuff with the standard operations, plan of operations, updating a lot of that, playing catch up, but we will soon get out there. In the meantime, this is a great route to utilize NSA to get this information out and start talking about it. So I'll go ahead and end there and take any questions that you may have. And thank you again.
Thank you, Jess. That's a lot of information, but it's very eye-opening to see that, from where in Arizona, from between Flagstaff and um that whole portion is just sand.
Mhm.
Anyone have any questions for Miss Jessie Jim?
Uh, this is Art Allison from Farmington and Tohatchee. Um, uh, the first chart you showed the total numbers of livestock, so on. I mean, sheep unit. Was that when you say sheep unit? You're not counting the cattle or any thought. You're just looking at the sheep itself, right?
No. So with the Navajo Nation, um, the numbers are managed as when we refer to livestock, all livestock, it's sheep units year long. And so if you're going to do cattle, well, the conversion is 4 sheep to 1 cow. And
Right.
then for the horses is 5 sheep to 1 horse.
I think I guess that brings my point up is that you don't see a lot of sheep units like you used to see as you go, let's say, in Fort Defiance and so on, but you do had an increase a lot of the cattle. I know that up in the Chusca Mountain where we run our livestock and so on, that uh, if some of the areas that we used to run our sheep and so on, we have cattle in there now. I mean,
Mhm.
it's not us, but it's from other people that are grazing from other areas, and you really don't know whose cattle they are. But I guess it's basically that's, and then it kind of ruins your grazing rotation that you have and so on, and doing that, and plus that it really is kind of hurting the vegetation itself in those areas. Um, but anyway, I guess I just see that with that chart that you had, I guess with that increase, I think a lot of that in my view is the increase in cattle,
Mhm.
in versus the sheep and so on, and plus, like you said, also the horses that are in those areas. Another point I guess I kind of wanted to find out is the fact that um, with with these, I don't know how many years we've had this drought, but I mean, we get a decent storm or get a snowstorm or a rainstorm and so on, but the drought's still here, and I think it's going on to what, 5 or 6, 7 years now, and some of the vegetation. Um, I assume that it's the BIA, or is it going to be your department that sometime in certain areas, if we can get some help, maybe reseeding some of those
Mhm.
areas. I don't know what extent some of the reseeding programs that you all do, and or if you work with Department of Ag on, I mean, the USDA on that or what, but um, I don't know uh, if um, if the nation is looking at some type of reseeding or helping some of us that are we like to do that in some of our fenced area and so on, uh, or somewhere meadows that we have in the mountains and so on. Just kind of get some help in that area.
Sure.
Anyway, my thought.
Yeah, no, it's great to hear your thoughts. And when you're sitting in this position, you just think, okay, what are what are what are people going to say, and how are they going to perceive it? um as far as the reseeding, that's where, as far, and then the fencing, you can request that from your grazing official, um, or your land board. You can request that. That's not restricted. It's just the process is long. Because if you want to put up a fence, okay, you go talk to your official, you request that, and they, bring it up at the district meeting, and then from there, the district decides, they recommend it, and you give your reason, and you speak through your official, and then from there, they take it to the agency or the joint land board, and that's where they recommend to Department of Agriculture as well as BIA that you need a fence here. And that's where we need to have the conversation with RDC is these RMUs, if we can establish RMUs, and then the criteria needs to change as well. With an RMU, you can be allowed to participate with USDA programming because you have that RMU. The problem there is you got to have 120 sheep units on your permit or more to be considered. But with the decline in range condition, as well as, reducing your numbers, you're not going to be eligible. But if we do it this way, both ways can work. It's just we have to understand from all levels how the process works. The grazing officials and land board need to understand their functions and also how they proceed forward. And then from there, it goes to, with the assistance of Department of Agriculture as well as BIA, it then goes to RDC. And then from RDC, they're the ones that make it a law to move forward. So that's one thing we all need to understand and start voicing that this needs to happen. And then as far as reseeding, the AIF monies, that's what it's there for. I'm not too sure if you attended the AIF presentation, but the Navajo Nation does have PRF insurance, pasture range forage insurance for trust lands. And then from the indemnities we receive, we are able to do agriculture AIF projects, and reseeding is one of them. I know that Fish and Wildlife, they're putting up a seed bank here for this purpose. And then if we could get our producers to sign up with USDA, we need to first fix how the process is here on the nation to allow you guys to do it yourself and participate in this program. We can't, manage it here from the government. It's better managed by you guys. So I just wanted to, provide that insight to your questions and your statements. And thank you for attending as well as giving your input on it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Art. Any other questions from our audience tonight? Okay, so just a few chats in the chat box. Marge, good information. Jesse, Michael, excellent presentations. Jim and Terrell, thank you for the information. Okay, so we'll go ahead and end it now. Thank you again to Jesse for providing tonight's presentation.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh no. Let's see. Something's wrong. Okay. What? I'm trying to pull up my PowerPoint, but for some reason it does not want me to. Okay. All right. So, just a couple more informations before we end it. For those of you that are still on here, we do have a sheep shearing vaccine workshop. So there's two of them. Both of them are pretty replicated. It's just in two different locations. So the first one is on the 17th, which is this Thursday from 9 to 4 at the Bahala Chapter House at Vanderwagen. So this one is going to be hands-on training afterwards, as well as another one that's happening the following day on the 18th from 9 to 4, and that will be at the Cow House auction. So if you are wanting to participate in the demonstration sheep shearing, definitely make sure that you bring your shears. And also we do have I'll just go ahead and share with you guys the layout of our agenda. So this is what it will look like. So we do have the welcome introduction. Then we're going to be talking about sheep nutrition. This is going to be talking about mineral supplementation, body condition scoring, and mouthing ewes. Then we're also going to do a fecal egg counting. This one is just going to be the USU going to be sampling some manure coming from your farm, and they're going to determine what type of, parasites are laying around in their pen and how you should, wrap the nutrition and the vaccine around that. So leading with sheep health, we're going to be talking about vaccine timing and shot placement, as well as deworming, common diseases, and hoof health. Then we're going to end it with our professional sheep shearer who's going to be talking about key preparation for successful shearing. such as maintaining and caring for your sheep shearing equipment, oiling, as well as sharpening, where to get it sharpened, how to manage it well, how to shear better with it. And then we'll go into the hands-on electric and hand shearing instructions. So this will conclude until all sheep are shorn. Okay, next we'll go ahead and move on to our following event. So we do have the livestock first aid training that's happening the next week on Tuesday. So we'll be doing the same thing as replicated from last year, but a little bit different. We're gonna have folks participate in actual how to suture. Not on live animals, but more on the skin practice sutures. So you'll be taught how to suture external small wounds, as well as look into the bovine trick testing and how it's done, and we'll see that on live demonstration. So other than that, we do have those two events going on, but you can also access these upcoming events on our NSA platform. So as I've mentioned from the beginning, we do have a conservation planning program. And if you are a producer that is wanting some assistance in helping develop a basic conservation plan, going through each section one by one to get you pretty much engaged with it so that way you can do it on your own, we definitely provide that assistance of free of charge. So if you are wanting to have a one-on-one technical assistance, please email Ms. Shirley Toth, and her email is highlighted in blue here. Then we're also on Facebook, and all of our webinars are recorded and they will be posted on the YouTube channel on next week. Then we also are slightly behind on our bi-monthly newsletter, but we will get that out soon. Overall, thank you all for participating in tonight's presentation. I really hope you enjoyed it and took a lot of information back from it. So then again, like I mentioned, this webinar is recorded and it will be shared next week on Monday. Other than that, stay tuned for our next upcoming webinars and look us up on Facebook and as well as our active website. So with that being said, thank you all for joining us, and I hope you all have a lovely evening.
Thank you, Miguel. We'll see everyone.
Thank you.